Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. Since the last Friday of this month falls on ANZAC Day, I thought for Forgotten Friday we should take a look at some Australian aircraft from the Korean War. In this case, we'll be taking a look at the vintage Airfix 1/72nd scale Fairey Firefly Mk.V and the Pioneer 2 Hawker Sea Fury. Both of these are kits I picked up secondhand from the Queensland Air Museum for around about 20 AUD. I've also done up some custom decals to do 2 Royal Australian Navy aircraft with these kits, so I'll talk a bit about those as well as the schemes I've chosen towards the end of this video. But first of all, let's have a look at what's inside both of these boxes. So, kicking things off with the Hawker Sea Fury, according to Scalemates, this appears to be the original release of this tooling from 1988 with Pioneer 2, with a kit number of 4002. And this particular one appears to have a dedication to the Royal Navy historic flight, and I suspect perhaps they used the Sea Fury that they had at the time as a reference when designing this kit. The box art features a very nice picture of a Sea Fury from the Royal Navy flying over some mountains, perhaps in Korea, with a bit of AA coming up in the background and shooting at it, which looks pretty nice. The sides of the box feature a small side profile of the same aircraft we see on the box, with some warnings that no cement or paint is included and a recommended age of 9+. The top of the box has a very similar profile for presumably another scheme that we have, along with the address for Pioneer 2 models, and a little note that it was assembled and distributed in the UK. I'm assuming that means manufactured, because you probably wouldn't want to buy a model kit that was already assembled. The back of the box has our profiles again of the 2 schemes that appear to be included. One of them is a Royal Canadian Navy aircraft from Squadron 871 in 1953. And the second aircraft appears to be the one that the Royal Navy historic flight had in 1989, although I believe it unfortunately crashed. Interestingly, I've noticed that the underside profile for the historic aircraft has TF956, but the side here has TF958 for its registration or serial, and I think 956 is actually the correct one, and yeah, it looks like the box art has 958, so that might be a small printing error. The sides of the box do feature a repeat of the box art there, which is pretty standard for most model kits. And opening things up, being a second-hand kit, I'm assuming that once it had a plastic bag for all of the parts, but at some point that was opened up and the parts have just been left in there. So I'll remove those now. So inside we have a set of decals, 3 sets of sprue molded in a sort of white greenish plastic, a set of clear sprues here for the cockpit, and we've got the instructions, which we'll have a closer look at to see how this one goes together. So on the front of the instructions, we've got a very nice little picture here of a Sea Fury in black and white, which looks quite cool. And then we've got a bit of history about the aircraft and some of its specifications, along with recommendations for colours, although it doesn't appear to use any codes, just sort of a name for each of the colours. Opening up these rather small instructions, it appears everything is sort of on this one page. There's not really a number for which assembly comes first, but I'm assuming it's left to right. So we've got a couple of parts here to make up the cockpit, consisting of a floor, seat, and rear bulkhead there with a headrest. We've got a little sub-assembly here for the engines, which are pretty basic, just a set of propeller blades with the spinner going on the front of that. And we've got a little pin here, which is pretty typical assembly. If you don't glue that to the cowling, obviously the propeller will be able to rotate. It doesn't really clearly mention this, but I'm assuming you then put the cockpit inside the middle of the fuselage before joining the halves together. And then you can add the engine assembly to the front, the wings, which appear to consist of a single lower half and 2 upper halves. We've also got a landing light by the looks of things, or some sort of cover there, a pitot tube, and it also looks like the instructions indicate you have to drill out holes here for drop tanks and armament. Then you can add the undercarriage here, which consists of a couple of struts along with several landing gear bay doors, and then a single piece here for the main wheels. We've got drop tanks and several rockets included. By the looks of them, 2 rockets for each side and presumably 2 drop tanks as well. There's also a tail hook, a tail wheel, and the tail wheel bay doors at the back there. And it doesn't indicate how to actually do this, but it does show that you have the option to have the landing gear extended or retracted. So that looks like it's pretty much it for the instructions, so they're pretty crude. Fortunately, it's a very basic kit. Otherwise, these instructions without very much guidance on actually how things go and what sub-assemblies are which, is probably not going to be very helpful for anyone who's not experienced with building models. The back of the instructions here also mention a 1990 release from Pioneer Models, so perhaps this was a later reissuing than 1988, but with different instructions but the same box. We've also got a guide here on how to apply the decals, but no marking guide, so I'm assuming you have to rely on the profiles on the box to actually know where to put them. Having a look at the first sprue here, we have both of our wing sections, so we've got the single lower piece and then the two upper halves here. The detail on them is in fact recessed, which doesn't look too bad at all. The plastic has a bit of a soft sort of textured feel to it, almost a little bit chalky, I guess some people might call it. We've got a few little raised details for these bulges here, which I believe housed the ammunition or sort of covered the area for it, for the two cannons. And we have got a deeper recess here for the wings, which don't have any fabric texturing on them, but I do believe they were all metal on the Sea Fury. But they have done recessed trim tabs and other details, which aren't too bad. On the underside, we do have a little area here for the landing gear bay with some internal detailing attempted, although it's very shallow and so not very realistic, and the detail looks quite simplified, just being some sort of grid pattern with raised lines to sort of represent the internal framework. We do have full holes cut out here for, I'm assuming, some landing lights, although I don't know if we've actually got any clear parts for those. And on the inside you can see there's a couple of little ejector pin marks which may need to be sanded down to avoid them getting in the way, and we've also got these little recesses here to drill out for the rockets or the drop tanks if you're including them. The hole for the pitot tube though is pre-cut out, and generally everything is pretty cleanly molded without too many imperfections apart from those mentioned ejector pins. The next set of sprues contains our fuselage halves, which again have some recessed detailing. Not amazing ones, but still pretty reasonable, and probably a nice step up from raised ones, which I believe were featured on the older Frog kit. We have a little bit of detailing here, which is raised for where the sort of engine cowling area and the exhausts are, but again, very, very basic detail. I believe in reality there should be several rows of exhaust sort of sticking out here, but there aren't. It's just sort of a vague plastic raised area. But they have done a couple of little access hatches by the looks of things on the top there and on the tail, which isn't too bad. Again, I think there should be some texturing for fabric surfaces on the tail, but I'm not 100% sure. Other parts we've got on this sprue include our rockets here, which have their part numbers sort of stacked in a row, which is kind of cool. They're pretty basic, but in general the shape doesn't look too bad. It looks like we've got these railings here to mount them onto, although I don't think they've sort of got any recess to guide them into them, so that's going to be probably just vaguely lining them up. The cockpit floor appears to be contained here, along with our seat, which are very basic of their time. They've got a pretty large ejector pin mark on the seat there, so that will have to get sanded over, and I don't believe you actually have a pilot included, which is a bit of a shame. We've got what appears to be the tail wheel doors just here, which are pretty basic sort of squares of plastic. And as for the inside of the fuselage, there's no cockpit detailing, but there are some bumps here to help line parts up, so pretty basic but of its time. The last set of white plastic sprues here contain a lot of the smaller parts. We've also got our engine cowling here, which is very basic. It's sort of just a representation of the general shape, but without much detail. The spinner as well looks pretty decent, not that there's as much detail to have on it, so that's good. Our landing gear struts there are pretty basic. They're sort of just cylinders without any kind of detailing on them, but they do have holes here to help line parts up, which is handy. We've got some more struts here, which I believe are for the landing gear, as well as the tail hook and an antenna, or the pitot tube, I believe. A few landing gear bay doors. They don't have any interior detailing on them, so they're sort of just vague plastic shapes there. We've then got our main wheels here, which are pretty basic, with a sort of vague representation of the wheel hubs on the outside there, and nothing really on the inside, although that probably matters a bit less, seeing as it's going to be less visible. We've got our little part here for locking the propeller in place to the back of the engine cowling. The propeller itself is actually pretty cleanly moulded. There's only a tiny little bit of flash on the ends of the blades there, but nothing too bad. Our horizontal stabilizers are again recessed details, but pretty basic. And then we've got our drop tanks, the tail wheel, rear bulkhead with a little sort of circular bulge there for, I guess, the pilot's headrest, and then a couple more parts for the landing gear bay doors. We've also got a little part here that says made in Turkey, which is interesting because I think on the box it said in the UK. So perhaps when they said assembled, they meant everything was put in the box in the UK, which is funny. And finally, we have our clear sprue here with our single piece canopy, which has some sort of very vague lines there to represent where the framework is. And there appears to be a few imperfections, like I can notice a very large circular sort of shape there, which I'm not sure if that's a scratch or some sort of molding imperfection. And the plastic is very, very thick there. So, yeah, I reckon I will be either trying to vacuform this or perhaps stealing a canopy off of a Tempest, if that's similar enough. Otherwise, maybe I'll even see if I can buy an aftermarket vacuform one. So, yeah, probably not going to use this one. And I didn't notice it before, but we do actually have our landing lights molded to this sprue there, which are a nice little extra feature to have. As for the decals in this kit, they're pretty basic with only the main roundels and text sort of included, so no real small common stencils, which is pretty standard for the time. They have yellowed quite badly, but apart from that, they don't look too bad. The registry and the alignment of most of the decals looks pretty decent, although I can notice a few little blemishes like on the roundels here, and the maple leaves do look a little bit soft around the edges, and maybe the registry or the alignment is slightly off here. As mentioned, I've already done up some custom decals to replace these, which we'll have a closer look at the end of the video, but newer releases of this kit have also done them with much better decals, I believe. So that wraps up my look at the Pioneer 2 Hawker Sea Fury. So definitely a older kit that's not really up to modern standards. This one's been released many times by quite a few different manufacturers, ranging from Airfix and Matchbox with the two-seater version, and PM models are still producing this, and I believe they're quite common, especially in Europe and the UK. However, I haven't seen any brand new in Australia, and they generally seem to go for quite high prices secondhand. I do believe Trumpeter did a much more detailed and modern tooling of the Sea Fury, but again, I haven't seen it in Australia, and the ones I have looked at were like $70 secondhand AUD, so probably a bit expensive for an aircraft of this size. So I'm pretty glad I picked this one up, even if it is basic. It's definitely not going to be a build that appears for quite some time, as I plan to do a fair bit of redesigning of parts and 3D printing. So I'll definitely do a cockpit and probably replace the engine cowling section, maybe do a new set of landing gear and some other details. So definitely a longer project that's going to be a while off. However, if you want to see one being built out of the box as it is, Matt from Model Minutes did a fantastic video a couple years back doing a lovely glossy sea blue aircraft from Nowra. So I definitely recommend checking that one out, and I'll leave a link to it in the description. But otherwise, as a base for upgrading, this might be a decent one, but it was kind of one of the few options out there, and I really wanted to do a Sea Fury someday, so I thought I would try and do it, even if it is a bit of a challenge. Moving on to the Airfix Fairey Firefly Mk.V. This one's a bit of an older tooling, released originally in 1966, so I think that's around about 20 years older. And I'm not exactly sure which issue I have. I believe this box art with just the model on a white sort of blueprint background first appeared in the 80s. If it helps, I think this one might have been made in France. So yeah, that might narrow down the age. But as for the box art, it's, in my opinion, the more bland and boring of Airfix's ones. I much prefer the Roy Cross classic artwork with the aircraft being depicted in a bit of action or something going on, whereas this is sort of just a basic picture of a reasonably well put together model. So maybe it's honest and gives you a good idea on what you can achieve with the kit. Definitely a lot more achievable than the box art, but I don't think it's as good or inspiring, so not my favorite. The sides of the box have a side profile of the finished model, along with a note that it's manufactured from CPG Product Corp, which I think was the French company that was doing it. The sides feature a repeat of the box art, or the profile there, and the top just has some notes about the paint and glue not being included, that the instructions are included, which is nice, I suppose. The little made in France symbol here, and then we've got a recommended age for 7+. The box is a top opener, and since I also bought it secondhand from the Queensland Air Museum, it also had been opened from its plastic bag. But as you can see, we have the instructions, which we'll have a close look at in a sec. The decals are caught up inside of it. Then we have various small plastic sprues, or perhaps runners is a more accurate term, seeing as they're not really framed. With a couple little bits loose, but we'll have a closer look at all of that after we've seen what assembly's like. So the instructions are a nice set of classic Airfix ones with the titles at the top but no artwork, although we do have the typical nice detailed history about the aircraft, talking about its service during career and its armament along with some of its other specifications, and we've got it in several languages. Below that we then have some general instructions as well as our key. I'm not sure, I'm assuming this just adds a couple of extra languages to the key because we've already got the exact same one just down here. Then down the bottom, I think we've got some more warnings or special instructions. So we've got verbal instructions for how to do the folding wings and some of the options by the looks of things. The actual assembly guide itself starts here with the interior, which is pretty typical for most Airfix kits. We appear to have a couple of seats and bulkheads for the cockpit floor here, as well as a control column and two pilots. Although it doesn't appear there's any instrument panel, but it's nice that they've got a couple of basic details by the looks of things inside of the sort of observers area. Once that's assembled, we can then add that to one of the fuselage halves and install the exhausts, along with our propeller assembly, which consists of a spinner and a little locking pin there, so that if you don't glue it to the fuselage, it will be able to rotate. We can then join the fuselage halves together and add the horizontal stabilizers, and we've also got our canopy sections, which come in 3 sections. A single piece here for the pilot's area, but it looks like the observers is 2, so perhaps you could have that open if you wanted. Turning over the page for step 3, we then have our wings. So it looks like we've got the option here to have the wings fold with a couple of little pins and systems included. Not too sure what this little part at the back here is, but this looks like it's some sort of locking pin. And it looks like we've got basically an upper and lower half for the inner part of the wings, and then a upper and lower half for the outside, along with a aileron there, so a lot of little moving posable parts. I'm not sure if you're able to actually leave the wings unglued and move them. I think I'm going to try and actually do that if possible, and perhaps try and upgrade some of the details inside of the wing root, but I'll see how I go when I'm actually building the model. Obviously, you've got the options to have them extended or folded here, so you could definitely glue them in one of those 2 positions. Once you've done that, you've then got the landing gear, which consists of a main strut along with a smaller part here, and then we've got 2 landing gear bay doors, one for the outer part and then one for the inner, and we've got a tyre with the wheel hub separate. You've also got the option here to add the landing gear bay doors in the closed position, and it looks like there's a separate sort of tyre wheel piece here which you can glue there so that it will fit in the retracted position. And once you've done that, you've then got the option to add a couple of bombs on the underside of the wings here. We've got our cannon barrels and various other little accessories such as what looks like the pitot tube and some sort of antenna. It looks like we've got drop tanks as well as an option, which come in 3 sections there. And we've got our tail wheel, tail hook, and another antenna at the rear there. We've then got our marking guide at the back here with no color codes, basically just a English name for each of them. And it recommends slate grey M2 for the top and duck egg green for the underside. We've got a basic layout for where the decals would be, but it doesn't really have any identifying features for them, so you've basically just got to eyeball it and put the decals where they look like they go. So yeah, definitely a bit more basic than more modern kits, but still reasonably useful. So having a look at the plastic parts, we'll start off with the fuselage halves here, which appear to have come off their sprues. We've got, as is typical for old Airfix, raised details with a lot of rivets, although fortunately they don't seem to be as pronounced and strong as some other kits, and they actually do seem to be pretty close to in scale, which is nice. All of the panel lines are raised, which I personally don't like, although I don't mind raised rivets on some aircraft. I'm thinking perhaps when I build it, I will actually use the raised rivets as a template and try and follow them with a riveting tool. But in general, I'd say you could still get a decent looking aircraft without doing any modifications to the surface details. It's probably just personal preference at that point, really. But we do have some nice fabricing textures on the tail surface there. We've got the trim tabs recessed, but all of the little access hatches along the fuselage there and the little grab handles and areas are all raised. We've got some more raised and larger rivets around the engine access hatches, which actually don't look too bad in my opinion. And as for inside, there's nothing really apart from the part number and some ejector pin marks. although there are these little raised bumps which I think are to help guide the interior floor work into place. I should probably also point out they have done a recess here for the radiator, although there's no radiator details, and I don't think we have a part included for them. So yeah, a little bit basic compared to modern kits, but I think the surface detail, considering the age and type, is actually pretty reasonable, and those raised rivets aren't too exaggerated. The various outer wing parts have also come off their sprues, and pretty much exactly the same as the fuselage, they have raised rivets. They look a little bit more pronounced on these parts and a little bit taller, but they still look pretty small and in scale compared to many of Airfix's other kits. The flaps have a very pronounced recess here for them, which stands out quite a lot, but all of the other things like these access hatches and details are all raised. The holes are pre-drilled out for the drop tanks and the bombs there, so you're going to want to either fill them in if you're not putting them on, or definitely install them. The upper surface of the wings, again, has the typical sort of raised bulges, which I believe are for where the ammunition for the cannons is sort of fared over. And we've also got this part here, which I think is part of the flap guidance system, because I think they actually kind of came out further. So yeah, pretty nicely done, I think, for the age of the kit. I'm not sure if it's intentional, but on the inside part of the wings here where they fold, it does appear they've done some raised parts for some sort of internal framework replication. It doesn't look super accurate in my opinion, but it does look like they might have had an attempt at it. And we can see the various sort of holes here to help line it up with the wing folding system that's included in this kit. Again, I'm not sure if you could actually leave the wings unglued and have them fold if you wanted to. I think that would be a really cool feature to try and include, since I quite like doing stop motions with my kits. So if I can do so, I will definitely try with this kit. Moving on to the actual parts that remain on the sprues. Again, for the inner part of the wings here, we have some raised rivet details with raised panel lines. Unfortunately, it looks like we've got quite a few sink marks and holes on the lower part of the wings there. Lucky it's not on the upper surface, but still that's probably going to need some correcting. There is a little bit of framework here, which I think is purely to make the wing folding system functional on the inside of the wheels. And it doesn't look like there's any detailing on the inner part of the wings where the wheel bay would be, apart from some holes which I think are just to attach the tyre if it's in the closed position. We appear to then have the front part of the drop tanks there, which have a fair bit of flash on them, so that's going to need to be sanded. We've got some smaller parts here, which I think are parts of the bombs where the tail fins are. A very thick pitot tube there with a sink mark right in the middle. Our pins here, which are, I think, for the wing folding mechanism. The control column, which actually doesn't look too bad for this older kit. And these look like our wheel hubs with a little bit of surface detail for the outer hub there, which doesn't look too bad. And another little washer pin here, which I think might be for the propeller. On the next set of sprues we have here, we've got the exhausts, which are very long. I'm not sure if that's just because of how far sunk into the fuselage they are, but they do look quite large. I'm probably going to replace them with 3D printed ones, just because you can get drilled out ones a lot easier that way. The horizontal stabilizers again have raised rivet details and raised panel lines. However, the recess for where the actual control surface for the elevator is present, and they have done recesses for the trim tabs there, which don't look too bad. These appear to be the rear section of the drop tanks, which are a lot cleaner molded than the front part. Our tail hook here, which is actually quite thin, so that doesn't look too bad at all. Next to that, the landing gear struts, which have a little bit of basic sort of detailing for them, but nothing too crazy. Our landing gear bay doors there, which have a couple of ejector pin marks on the inside, which might want to be cleaned up, and on the outside, a little bit of detail. The landing gear is a part I'm considering replacing with 3D printing, but considering the age of the kit, what you get is not too bad. On this sprue, we have our bombs, which I think might be either 500 or 250 pound British bombs. And it looks like we've got the underside or the top of the tanks possibly, which attach to the little rear section we've got here, possibly. I don't know. I've got no idea what these parts are then, unless they're another part of the bombs, but yeah, that's a bit strange. We've then got our cannon barrels here, which are pretty basic. They're sort of bottle-shaped parts there. Then we've got some sort of small antenna, which I think goes on the wings, if I remember from the instructions. Ooh. And our ailerons here are made out of metal in this kit, and they have raised rivet details with a little bit of a sink mark in the middle there, but a nice little recess here for their trim tab. This would be the other part of the drop tanks, so maybe these are some sort of attachment point for them. And this appears to be another part of the landing gear bay doors with a very large and noticeable pin mark there in the middle, but nothing on the outside. And whoop, that's dropped off, so I'll have to keep that safe somewhere. And the last sprue that we've got that's sort of largely intact here contains our landing gear options for when they're closed or in the retracted position there. So you just glue those onto the inside of the wings there. Then we've also got our tyres here, which actually have what looks like a bit of raised detailing for the rim on the outside there. So that's a little bit annoying. It would have been nice if the entire wheel hub was actually moulded separately rather than just part of it, but oh well. There is a bit of a seam line as well on the outside of the tyre, so that will have to get sanded down a little bit. We've got what appears to be the bulkheads for the interior as well as the seats, which are pretty basic, sort of just general representations. The tail wheel here, which is pretty basic but not too bad. The spinner, which has a little bit of flash on it but nothing too major. Our other set of antennas here for, I think, the upper side of the fuselage. I think these are part of the landing gear struts there as well, and possibly some sort of exhaust or some other system, which I think gets glued onto the wings. And then we've got our cockpit floor and our two pilots. Curiously, we've got two different pilots. We've got one who appears to be a general sort of pilot wearing a helmet. There's a very large sinkhole in the middle of him, so it looks like he's been shot in the chest, and he's also in a very strange pose. He's sort of got one foot on the rudders, the other sort of fully 90 degrees flat, and one hand on a throttle, but then his hand on the other side is down, so not a very realistic looking pilot. And our other guy is, well, not too much better. He's sort of just flat and very kind of strangely proportioned, especially compared to the other pilots. So yeah, not the best pilots included, but hey, at least we've got some crew members to make the cockpit look a little bit less empty. The last bit we have that's not clear is the propeller, and it's come off the sprue, but in general it looks pretty good. A little bit of flash on the tips there, but nothing too major, and it has 4 blades, which is good for the later model of Firefly. Unfortunately, all of the clear parts came off their sprue, so they might have been bumping around and getting scratched for the last couple of years, but in general they look okay. They sort of remind me of Hasegawa canopies in that the framework on them is only a very faint raised line rather than an actual raised sort of area for the frames. It's just sort of the outline. Very thick plastic, which is pretty typical of the time, with a couple of little scratches and imperfections. Probably not too bad considering the level of detail that's in the cockpit, but when I make this kit, I definitely want to improve them. Whether I try and vacuform these parts, which may be possible, given that at least there is some of the framework present, or if I get them on aftermarket, I'm not quite sure yet, but definitely want to do a better job than the ones included in this kit. And finally, we have our decals here, which unfortunately have also yellowed. It also appears that the red dot on the roundels there is really quite off-center. It's definitely more lower and also to the right relative to the camera. The decals include both the roundels and also the black and white identification bands, which I think would be an absolute nightmare to apply as decals, so I would definitely recommend painting them, especially because I think the drop tanks are a must include in this kit, so it would be a bit annoying to try and get the decal around them or to get the holes then drilled out afterwards. Interestingly, I'm not too sure what country these markings are actually for. Now, they've got the Royal Navy marking there, which would suggest it's British, but WB351 was apparently actually operated by the Australian Navy for a while. I believe it was actually loaned from the Royal Navy, so perhaps that's why it still has the Royal Navy text above the serial rather than RAN or Royal Australian Navy. Looking at scale mates, it's listed as both Australian and also British depending on which year you're looking at, but as mentioned I will definitely be replacing these with custom ones, which we'll have a look at very soon. So that wraps up our look at the Airfix Fairey Firefly Mk.V. So a reasonably decent kit, and I think especially good considering its age, and I think the raised riveting detail on it really doesn't look too bad, especially considering what some other Airfix kits from the same time period look like. Unfortunately, there isn't really a modern Firefly Mk.V kit on the market, as far as I'm aware. I've never seen one in hobby shops brand new, only one's second hand, and they're either the Airfix kit or very rarely the much more detailed but expensive special hobby kit. So unfortunately there's not really many options for a Firefly, especially the Mk.V variant, which I think is a shame because it's quite a nice looking aircraft in my opinion, and though it didn't really do much during World War II, especially the Mk.V which came out afterwards, it still did do several interesting jobs, and I think it would be nice to see a more modern tooling around. So much like the Fury, this one's going to be a longer term project with a lot of 3D printing upgrades, especially for the cockpit area, because I think it's a really interesting layout and I'd like to sort of show off the details there. Possibly the landing gear as well, maybe some radiator details and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's going to be a while before I get around to building this one. So in order to replace the old yellowed decals in both of these kits, and also to get some markings I wanted to do, I decided to go with custom designing and getting my decals I wanted printed. So I've designed these up in GIMP using the original decals as a reference for rough scale, and then had them printed by Laser Shark Decals, who I'll leave a link to in the description. While they're not perfect, and definitely not the same quality as Cartograph decals, and also a little bit transparent, hence why I've done both the coloured and also a white backing decal, I think it's really awesome being able to do whatever decals you want, and I think the quality on them is still definitely up to my standards. The markings I decided to go with were WB393 for the Firefly and WE797 for the Fury. Both of these aircraft were operating off of the HMAS Sydney during the Korean War, flying various missions including ground attack, and both aircraft would actually be shot down by ground fire during the conflict, although fortunately in both cases the pilots were fine. WB393 was apparently a Royal Navy hand-me-down, and the story of WB393's rescue seems to be a rather interesting one. After it was brought down, the crew and crash site were protected by some Sea Furies and also some RAAF Meteors. Eventually the crew were rescued by a US Navy helicopter, which I think had been assisting the Royal Australian Navy for some time. And apparently the helicopter was not rated to fly at night, so when it was eventually flown in, it was getting quite late, and the pilot was apparently using the dome light to every now and again check the instruments, but otherwise basically flying the aircraft just by feel and sound, and I believe he was in fact rewarded a medal for his work. It was also apparently right up to the limit of the helicopter's range, and when it did land after picking up the crew, it was nearly out of fuel. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more of my videos, then please subscribe to the channel. And if you have any experiences with these kits or questions you'd like to ask, or even some friendly corrections, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. A massive shout out to my wonderful patrons who helped me to fund not only buying these kits, but also the products I use to make them. These ones are going to be quite a while off, as I've mentioned, but I will have part 2 of my Airfix Bowfighter coming out very soon, and I'll also be doing a build video on one of my 3D printed tank designs, so be sure to check that one out when it comes out. That's it for now, but until next time, as always, take care and model on.